Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D.
Brief.
This is the D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's arts
and entertainment scene.
This is the D.
Brief.
Hello and welcome to the Debrief. I'm your co-host. My name is Seth Ressler.
I'm Becky Scarcello.
And I'm Jag.
And every Thursday we do an in-depth interview with somebody who is really got their finger on the pulse in the arts and entertainment scene in Detroit. And this week we're going to get schooled, Becky.
I know.
Are you ready for this?
I'm nervous.
You guys are just nervous because you were the non-sports fans on the show.
That's exactly why we're
nervous.
nervous.
Yes, we always worry about that because obviously you know so much more about sports than we do. And you've bagged us a nice guest here.
Well,
Yes.
I know very little about sports compared to our guest tonight. So
it's a continuum
Yes.
of knowledge.
Yeah, so we're going to learn a lot tonight. We're very excited to have Michael Rothstein here. He is the Detroit Lions beat writer for ESPN and ESPN.com. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me. Really excited to be here.
Sorry. One more time. I had you on mute.
just say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, look, I guess the obvious place to start is how the Lions going to do this season, right?
Right.
I mean, I know enough to ask that question.
I'm proud of you, Seth. I've been teaching you well.
I was coached.
That's such a broad question, too. I mean, for the last few years, they've been really mediocre, and that's actually an improvement of what they were a decade before. So I would say probably much to the chagrin of a lot of Lions fans, they're probably still going to be very mediocre again. And it's not necessarily due to the talent they have on their roster, although some of that is questionable depending on what position you look at. But their schedule is really hard. And it's going to be really hard at the start of the year. And they play, Jag's favorite team, New England, and that's where that's where their new head coach Matt Patricia comes from. And obviously, the Patriots are the closest thing to a dynasty in sports right now. They play them in Week 3 at Ford Field. That should be a very exciting game. They open on Monday Night Football in Week 1 against the Jets, and they're going to more than likely be playing Sam Darnold, who's a rookie getting his first start. So it's going to be a really tough early stretch for them, but their schedule combined with the talent they have, probably another mediocre year. I've been saying for the most part between 7-9 and 9-7.
Really? I'm surprised you're coming in that low.
No way, man. That's where they've been for the last 5 years. They, with the exception of that 11-5 year, the Jim Caldwell's first year in 2014, they've been between 7 wins and 9 wins the last 5 years. So I don't see any reason why it would be any different at this point.
Well, you mentioned the coach, Matt Patricia, and that leads me to my next question because there's all this hype around him and coming in from New England and coming from that pedigree. One of the complaints I've heard from a lot of media folks is that Matt Patricia is sort of making this Patriots-like culture with the Lions. Also got Bob Quinn, the GM, who came from the Patriots, kind of restricting media access, not being as free to, and open to interviews and media as they have been previously. And some of the, longtime people that have covered the Lions have really complained about not having the access that they're used to. But my sense on that is if they're able to win, fans aren't going to care, right?
No, not at all. Fans, at the end of the day, do not care about what my schedule is like or what Dave Burkett from the Free Press's schedule is like or any of the other beat writers. They just care if the team wins or if the team loses. If the team wins, everything that Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn do will be great. If the team loses, everything that Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn do will be bad. Exactly. And I've covered enough sports throughout my life of good teams, and I've covered some really bad teams, and I've seen it both with the same coach that one year it can be great and everything's wonderful, and then the next year if they're 3-9, wow, the same shtick that worked well when they were 9-3 is no longer palatable to the fans when they're 3-9.
What are some of the differences?
Yeah, what are the
this year?
factors that are overblown that get blamed that you're like, that doesn't really have anything to do with it when a team doesn't do well or does do well?
Overall in sport,
and specifically to the Lions this year.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer that the whole distraction thing it's bunk. Like, teams always say, no distractions, or media is a distraction. Well, it's only a distraction if you let it be a distraction. Mm-hmm. These guys are not robots, and anyone who thinks that they are is just not paying attention to the human side of it. But there are things going on in people's lives that are way more distracting than whether I'm sitting next to a player talking to them about football or about their lives for 40 minutes a day. Like, there's way more that they have going on in their lives that is not going to be a distraction. It's just, in my opinion, a convenient catch-all for when things are not going right or when things are going wrong, or if they want to try to close ranks. Well, what's the easiest thing to pin something on? That's the media, and the media is a distraction. So I never have really bought in for the most part. There are certain circumstances and instances where I can see it, but on the whole, when I hear the media is a distraction, this and that, I'm like, all right, yeah, you're just being coached to say that and told to say that.
Just an
I
easy
don't-
target.
Yeah, I don't think you actually believe that.
Fake news.
Fake news.
So if the media isn't at fault,
Right. Which
which I feel like we've heard a lot recently, then you're talking about them having a mediocre year. What's it going to take to turn that around and to change that in your view?
better
Long-term?
players. And they're building that. I mean, and that's what really they've building for almost a decade now, because it started back in their 0-16 season in 2008, which at the time was the only 0-16 season in NFL history. That has since been changed because the Cleveland Browns
Yay,
went
Cleveland.
winless last year. I actually got sent to Cleveland after they went 0-16 because they had an 0-16 parade around First Energy Stadium in Cleveland. Coincidentally, that day, as I was standing outside, poorly prepared and poorly dressed because I had not looked at the weather, even though it was January in Cleveland, was -16 with wind chills. So everything was really symmetrical with that. But no, they had cars and buses and were marching and had signs and banners basically celebrating / protesting the fact that their team had gone 1-32 over the last 2 seasons. Now that was about Cleveland, not about Detroit, but it leads to what I was going to say, which is that Detroit started rebuilding at 0-16 after the 2008 season. They fired their coach, they fired their GM, all of that. They drafted Matthew Stafford with the first pick in the 2009 draft, and they've really been building since then with ups and downs. I would say since that point, they've only had one team that really should have been a contender, and that was the 2014 team. They had a really good defense. It's the best defense they've had in my 6 years covering the Lions. It's maybe their most balanced offense that they've had in my 6 years covering the Lions. And they were a team that really should have done well, and they made the playoffs, and a call here or there and a play here or there, and they might beat Dallas. And then it's maybe a completely different situation. Jim Caldwell potentially still here. Martin Mayhew, who was the general manager at the time, still here. So it's like that's small of a thing of how a team goes. And I think that people in Detroit forget, and I think people around the NFL forget, the NFL is a league based on parity and built on parity. So the majority of teams every year are between 7 wins and 9 wins.
Right.
And that's just where they sit. Very rarely is a team like Cleveland, where they've been bad for so long, or Buffalo, before they made the playoffs last year, were bad for so long, or New England has been good for so long, or Pittsburgh has been good for so long. Remember, Green Bay, before they got Brett Favre, and then Aaron Rodgers, they were bad for a while. I mean, that's going back 25 years now, but they were bad for a long time. So it's that, to answer your question, that's a long answer, I realize,
Right.
but it's just that's just part of the NFL. And it's do you have your quarterback? And they do. Do you have the coaching staff? And do you have the stability? And do you have the consistency and the continuity? And those last 4 questions are really what they've been trying to build over the last decade. And they're on their 3rd head coach now since then, and they're on their 2nd general manager, and they're hoping, obviously, that this is the right combination. Now, of course, when you look at New England, most of the people who've left from Bill Belichick's tree of coaches and general managers have failed when they've left because they've done too much like the Patriots, or they just weren't maybe as talented as some people thought as a coach or a general manager. Obviously, the Lions are hoping that trend is bucked here.
Great.
But that's just what it's been really since Belichick's assistants have left.
That leads me right into my next question, Mike, which is, do you see any difference here? Do you see Patricia failing like other Patriots assistants coaches had, or do you see a higher ceiling for this team in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And also, is there a limit is there a window on Matt Stafford that might close in several years too?
Yeah, so all 3 of them, Matthew Stafford, Bob Quinn, and Matt Patricia, are all under contract until 2022. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be all here until 2022, as we've seen with almost every other Lions coach and general manager and arguably quarterback before. But that's the window, I think, at this point. Now, if they win, that window extends because guys are playing longer. Matthew Stafford has, for the most part, been really healthy other than his first 2 years of his career. So he's shown he's durable. So I think that the window is pretty large there still. as long as they win, and that's what it comes down to, is winning or losing with all of it.
Can they in the next several years?
Sure, I think that they have a lot of the offensive pieces to do it. I think their defense is not great, but so much of that turns over year in the NFL, unless you're a New England or a Pittsburgh or a Cleveland. But the difference between, say, a Cleveland and a New England and a Pittsburgh or a Green Bay or a Seattle is the quarterback. They have their quarterback, and that's the whole key to all this in the NFL. Is if you have your quarterback, then you have a fighting chance. If you don't have your quarterback, then you're grasping at straws and hoping you get lucky and hoping that maybe you find the guy in the draft or that a free agent has a way better year than you thought.
And you just wrote about this
there.
for ESPN, that you said that Stafford is the best quarterback in the NFL that's never won a playoff game. And there are others that say he's overrated. My sense on it has been he's been great. He's just never had the pieces around him in a changing system every couple of years.
And most people would agree. Well, I just say most, because I think it is a debate, but there are a large portion of people, myself included, who would say that. And there was a large argument for a while with Matthew Stafford that, well, he shouldn't need to have all these pieces around him. But very rare is...
team.
There's 11 guys on the field.
Yeah,
It's a team.
But listen, there's not a quarterback in the NFL that's been sacked over the past 2 years more than Matthew Stafford. And that he's been healthy through that is kind of amazing. But if he doesn't have the protection, then it doesn't matter what skill position guys you have, because he had Calvin Johnson and he still wasn't getting a ton of protection. But when they had Calvin Johnson, they didn't really have much of a run game. They didn't have a great second receiver. That's why that 2014 team was so good, was they had that. They had Matthew Stafford. They had a good offensive line. They had Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate, and they had Reggie Bush, who was a 1,000-yard rusher that year. That is the type of offense that you need, and their defense was great. And that's been another problem for the Lions, is that their defense has often not been good. Ever since Ndamukong Suh left after the 2014 season, they've been really trying to piece it together here and there. They have a really good secondary now, but their front seven is lacking. And to me right now, going into the season, based off of what I've seen so far, if you're looking going back to your question from before of why they might be mediocre this year, their front seven is not very good, and their pass rush is not great. So I think that if they are somehow able to improve that, and they can do that through scheming and do that through Matt Patricia's defensive play calling, or I was going to use the word wizardry, but that's giving him way too much credit at this point, although he's been quite good in New England. Then
He's really smart. He's an engineer, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But that's how they get out of this mediocrity. But that to me is that, and the offensive line and being able to keep Matthew Stafford standing up and not having to run for his life all the time are really the two keys to them maybe being better than a 7-9, 8-8 team.
What are the things that you're going to pay attention to this season that you're really going to be watching that are going to tell you how the season's going to play
Those two
out?
things right there. And you won't know really until the end of September, because the first few weeks are such a crapshoot. You just never really know what it'll be, because guys are still feeling themselves out, feeling situations out. Coordinators, coaches, there's learning curves there with your new personnel, and that's what the preseason is theoretically for. But you're not focusing as much in the preseason on individual game planning and scheming. So I'd say a month in, you'll know. But that to me is what I'll be looking at really from the jump, and what I've been looking at a lot this preseason. Like, I haven't really cared or paid much attention to how Stafford's throwing the ball or whether his receivers are catching the passes, because I know that those guys are known quantities. They can play. It's, can they get a run game going? Can Matthew Stafford be protected? Can they get a pass rush? All three of those things are still giant question marks based off of what they've done in the preseason. And that's, I think, what I'll be looking for sure over the next month and a few weeks.
So we've talked a lot about football, obviously, and we talk about entertainment on this podcast. Going to a Lions game
Football's kind of entertainment, right?
You could say that, yes. So for some more so than others, but so you go out to a Lions game that is a big day out, a big night out, a big thing to do at Ford Field. Just, you mentioned they open the year on Monday Night Football. They've got the Patriots later in September on Sunday Night Football. It's a night game. It's a national game. But the actual experience at Ford Field is improving this year because they've got all these exotic foods, whether it's buffalo chicken, tater tot, nachos.
Those dessert nachos with the chocolate cherries.
That's what gets Becky excited.
I mean, yeah.
Listen, this is also the organization that had the big blue donut a few years ago.
Yeah.
That thing. I mean, I I can't eat gluten. I have celiac, so I don't mess with any of that anyway, which is why before we were on air, Jag was asking me about the food. I'm like, I don't really know because I can't really eat any of it.
Yeah.
And I try to eat pretty healthy, and none of that
None of
sounds that.
Right.
No.
But like if they had a really great like Michigan cherry salad, I'd be all about that.
And they
But-
do have some gluten-free entrees, but
They do, but they're also
But
like
they're not good for
no,
you.
No, not at all. But that big blue donut was maybe they brought it. One of the Beat writers bought one, brought it off the press box, and I mean it just. Oh, it looked so bad. It looked like it was in The Simpsons.
Yeah, it wasn't food. It's not
no,
food.
it looked like the donut that Homer would eat in The Simpsons,
in Technicolor.
combined with the donut that was on top of the donut shop that had like the one bite out of it, but it was so big that you couldn't eat all of it. Like if one person ate all of that, I think that would probably be enough calories for like 6 days.
but the good side of the
Not to rail on the big blue donut.
We've established you're not a fan of the big blue donut. So, but concession-wise, one of the complaints going, whether it's a concert or a sporting event, is that it's so expensive after you've spent all this money at the ticket, food and drink and all this sort of stuff. That said, they've got these happy hours. They've got really inexpensive concessions they're introducing for 2018. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can. I mean, and that was one thing I noticed last year in the preseason because they would show the ads on the Ford Field billboards or jumbotrons, as they're probably called, about their food deals, and I'm like, that's not a deal at all. That's like, that's crazy. It was like, I don't remember the exact cost, so I don't want to say what it was, but it was, I remember seeing that, and I'm like, wow, it was like for like a hot dog and like a soda and a popcorn, and I didn't even remember. It was like more than like your movie theater stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
You get to expense that, right?
He doesn't need it anyway.
I wouldn't need it anyway.
So, yeah.
But yes. That said, yeah, something that happened in Atlanta last year. Atlanta opened their new stadium. It's this giant, gorgeous, state-of-the-art
With
place.
a Chick-fil-A that doesn't open on Sundays. by
Right.
the way.
That I don't get, but they play soccer there, so maybe that's why.
Okay.
And they have concerts. But yeah, I don't understand why you would have a Chick-fil-A other than a Chick-fil-A in a place that is primarily used on Sundays.
Right.
But what they did was they had lower price concessions. And they really focused on that, and they wanted to make it affordable to fans because, let's face it, going to an NFL game, going to any professional sporting event, going to a college sporting event is an expensive proposition between your tickets, your parking, your transportation, and then your food. That's hard for a lot of people, a lot of middle-class people. That's really difficult to do. So Atlanta really tried to take one aspect out of that and make it cheaper for food. And Detroit saw that, and their fans were really on the Lions about that. And they came in with different types of pricing options. They had done the happy hour thing in the past where if you came in early, you get maybe better deals. Now they've extended that, and they're trying to find ways to make things cheaper and work with their partner, I believe it's Levy Restaurants, however you say it, to find ways to make things cheaper for fans when it comes to the food space. And that is one thing, listen, I will bang on the Lions for a lot of things, especially on the field, but they're at least trying off the field in the stadium, in the stands, to help their fans and to make it a better fan experience. And they're doing that through the food options. And I know Wi-Fi was a big thing, and Rod Wood, their team president, made it a point to get better Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi is actually pretty good now, which is great for everybody involved.
Well,
I
you guys
think-
have your own Wi-Fi in the press box.
We do, but still, that Wi-Fi didn't always work all that well before they really did all the renovations. And the stadium, I travel all around the country, obviously going to stadiums. I've been doing this for a while now, and it's a really impressive stadium. I think it doesn't always get the attention maybe and the credit it deserves because it's an indoor stadium, and a lot of indoor stadiums don't exactly like character. I like the stadium a lot. I think it's a really, really nice venue. My dad and my brother usually come in for Thanksgiving, and they go to the game while I'm working, and they've been really impressed by the venue as well. And my dad's been to a lot of different stadiums and stuff like that. It's a really good venue compared to a lot of other stadiums across the country. And I just wanted to point that out, that I think that fans sometimes maybe take advantage of that or take that for granted. But it is a really nice place to see a game or a concert.
My sense is that now that Little Caesars is here and getting a lot of accolades and getting a lot of attention, that the folks over at Ford Field, do they feel pressure because of that? Because Little Caesars is getting
I've never sensed that because it's a different audience, a different market, and if you're an NBA fan, you're an NHL fan, there's 41 dates a year you're theoretically going to that. With the NFL, if you include the preseason games, which
Nobody wants to go to.
Yeah, but season ticket holders get the ticket. There's 10 opportunities to go, so it's a different type of audience. It's a different type of atmosphere. It's a different, I don't want to say different type of clientele, but if you're going to an NFL game, you're maybe only going to 1 or 2 a year if you're a casual fan, just because of the cost plus the opportunity. And with an NBA game, you could have a Tuesday night NBA game where you can get a ticket for a Pistons game, especially for like $8. So it's a much easier ticket to go to. So I don't think that they're competing with them in that space because it's a completely different market. But I'm not Rod Wood, so I can't really speak to that. Just my opinion.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about distractions, and that players obviously have a whole lot more going on in their life. And I think we forget that too. We put these athletes in this space like they're supposed to perform for us, but they have these whole lives. And some of the things you've written recently are really interesting. Could you highlight a couple of players that have some interesting backgrounds?
Just going to that in general, it seems like a lot of players have had children this month.
Stafford had number three.
Matthew Stafford had child number 3. Nevin Lawson had his second child. He's one of their cornerbacks. So and there's been a bunch of other guys on the team too that have had their first, second, third kids all in the last month. So I was just like, sure, like that. To me, like if I'm in training camp, that is way more of a distraction than me asking you about like cover 2. Well, and you're not getting much sleep either. I mean, that's one of my favorite questions to ask players in the locker room. Like when I'm just talking with them is like, so you sleeping much? I mean, and I don't have any kids, so I don't understand it. Like I don't get that. Like I get the not sleeping part, but I don't understand the not sleeping because of kids part. And they all just will look at me and they'll just shake their heads and they'll be like, "You have no idea."
Let's add to that twins. I mean, that
was a year and a half ago.
Last one, twins were the last one.
That's double the work of just a kid. I mean, now you got to manage 2 at the same time.
And now 3.
Right?
Yeah, now they've got 3, all girls, by the way.
All under 10.
Yeah. Well, and Kelly Stafford, who's Matthew's wife, I wrote a really large story on Matthew before they had the twins. A couple of years ago, and she told me, and she said it a couple other places since, Matthew's really the one that wanted girls, and Kelly's the one that wanted boys. Kelly's a really big athlete herself. She was a cheerleader at Georgia. She played basketball. She's actually she didn't play at Georgia, but she's quite a good basketball player in high school. Her brother actually played football at Air Force and is now an assistant coach. I think he's still in Buffalo. So she comes from a very athletic family, and she definitely wanted boys, and Matthew, from what she said, really wanted girls. So he's kind of getting what he wants here.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, and we asked him about the kid situation when he talked a couple weeks ago, and he had said that he thinks that they're done for a while after 3 because NFL quarterbacks sometimes have large families. Like Phillip Rivers has a ton of kids. Dan Orlovsky used to be Matthew Stafford's backup in Detroit and was part of that 2008 team. He's the guy who ran out of the end zone. That's what people most know him for. He's now actually a colleague of mine at ESPN. He's a wonderful guy. They have a ton of kids too, and Matthew used to like kind of jab Orlovsky a little bit about that back when Matthew had no kids.
Sure.
That has since changed. But back to your question. We totally went off the rails there.
No, that's interesting too.
Yeah, but back to your question. Yeah, I mean there are a bunch of guys in that locker room that do things outside of football. I mean there are some guys that football is very much a large part of their lives, and for most of these guys that's what it is. But in the off season they pursue other interests in life. They'll pursue other interests than just playing football and playing video games in their family. Some of them are, working on grad school. Some of them have plans to go to med school after they're done with football. Some are artists. Some, kind of really do a lot with Humane Society. Like they're very different. They're more NFL players in general and athletes in general are more well-rounded than a lot of times they get credit for. So I guess that's being vague in general with your question. I mean, there's a story that I wrote that ran earlier this week about Zach Zenner. I've written about him a few times. He's running back on the Lions. He may or may not make the team. He's been on the team the last couple of years. He was a really big fan favorite his rookie year. Well, so he didn't know if he went undrafted in 2015. He didn't know if he was going to be in the NFL or not. He came from South Dakota State. He was a really great player there. But he was like, I'm going to med school. This is what I've always wanted to do. I'm going to med school when I'm done playing. But he didn't know if he was going to play, so he applied to medical school. He got to Sanford Med School
Wow.
at the University of South Dakota, and he is still deferring his acceptance away. But
Med school is my plan B, though.
right. Yeah,
He'll be the only guy to not have
Stanford.
debt from med school.
Yeah, Stanford.
we'll see. Sanford, not Stanford.
Stanford.
Sanford in South
At
Dakota.
South Dakota.
Sanford in South Dakota, not Stanford in California.
Oh, I thought you said Stanford.
No, I know
Okay.
that's on me. That's my
No,
New
no.
York way of talking really fast.
Okay, but still impressive
Still,
regardless.
Yeah.
Med school's med school.
Yes.
Sanford Med School, he did medical research in Detroit the past couple of off seasons, and then we were talking about kids before. He and his wife Alyssa had their first child this off season. That combined with a couple other things, Sanford had gone to him and said, "Hey, we'd like, do you want to come work with us this summer or this spring?" So he agreed to do that, and he worked remotely, and he worked on a very rare disease that afflicts children called Batten disease, looking for different drug treatments and different cures. And he would actually go to the Starbucks across, it's 2 miles away from the Detroit Lions facility after spring workouts every day, open up his laptop, use the free Wi-Fi at the Starbucks and a Barnes & Noble. And
Wow.
he'd sit there and he would just log into the microscope at the University of South Dakota and he would read slides and make judgments based off of that and send his findings in. And he was doing that for 2 to 3 hours every day. He'd have his young son on his shoulder or on his knee while he's Skyping into meetings, and the rest of the people at the meetings would see the kid's head every once in a while. And they'd just be like, this is kind of crazy a little bit. But the thing is, Zach Zenner is very well known. Like, where some people might know Zach Zenner in Detroit and within the NFL. In South Dakota, the guy is like a huge celebrity because he was he rushed for 2,000 yards for 3 straight seasons, and he was arguably one of the best players to ever come out of either South Dakota or South Dakota State. And he's a big deal. The person who was running his clinic was telling me this story, and I don't know how true it was, but it was a really funny story that she needed something for IT. And she went to the IT guy. He's like, no, I'm busy. I'm helping Zach Zenner out. Because Zach Zenner, and she was just like looking, she's like, I'm the boss around here. Right. Joking, obviously. But she was telling me the story. She's like, that's how big of a deal Zach is. Like when she went to the same IT guy and was like, hey, we're onboarding this new guy. And he's like, okay, what's the name? And he's like, Zach Zenner. The guy was like, the Zach Zenner? like the football? And she's like, yeah, the football playing one. She told me, and I saw this because I went with him. He was working at the VA hospital in Detroit with Dr. Noreen Rossi last year. And I tailed him for a day there. And it was the same thing there as it was here, in that when he was in the lab, either remotely or in a meeting or, kind of doing his microscopic work last year, he wasn't a football player. He's a scientist, and that's how they viewed him. And that was really, really important to him, but also important to the people he was working for, because that's how they want to view him as. And at the end of the day, when all of this is over, whenever football ends, he's either going to be a scientist or a doctor. And he's going to do one of those two things.
Amazing.
Yeah, and his story is really, I'm always kind of, whenever I ask him what's up, he's nicknamed Doc, so I don't actually say that whole thing. Because
what's up, Doc?
Yeah, I don't do
no
that.
No carrot in the mouth or anything?
No, definitely not. Carrots are really good, healthy food, going back to the Ford Field conversation. But no, I don't do that. But whenever I ask him what's going on and what have you been working on, when he comes back, and sometimes I know, sometimes I don't, it's always fascinating to hear him speak about what he's been working on, or as I did last year, kind of take a trip with him to go see that. And that's just one example of I think many of guys who are involved in finance or the arts or have very varied interests outside of football.
How much of these guys have ties to the city of Detroit? Because they're on the road a lot. Some of them aren't from here. Mm-hmm. To what extent do they actually get involved in the community and the city that they're playing for? And
it depends on the guy. It depends on the situation. The people who are here, I think, more long-term, your higher profile players, your bigger name players, they get more involved in the community. Tyre Whitehead is a good example. He was really involved in various charities in the community. He's actually didn't resign with the Lions. He's now in Oakland. but he was really involved with the downtown boxing gym, which is in Detroit, which is actually how I found out about the downtown boxing gym. And there's a story coming out in ESPN the magazine. I spent a good chunk of time there at ESPN the magazine, ESPN.com, about that gym. And we can maybe get into that at some point a little bit, but like he got really into the community. He's from Newark and played college football at Temple. Matthew Stafford, he's really involved, very low key. He doesn't publicize a lot of what he does. He's really involved with certain things. Obviously, he's from Georgia, but him and Kelly both live up here. But I mean, they gave $1 million to one of Mitch Albom's situations or Mitch Albom's recreation centers, and he does a lot with that. Golden Tate does a lot with veterans here in Detroit. And a lot of guys get involved in those things and those types of things. But a lot of times it depends on the player too. Like Ezekiel Ansah, who's from Ghana, most of his work is back in Ghana. I think he does some stuff here, but not a lot. But he also did a lot with the Flint water crisis. He raised a lot of money and gave water bottles when that was a couple years back. So guys generally get involved in the community. The Lions do some stuff broad-based, but a lot of guys on their own will get involved. And a lot of times they don't want publicity for it. They don't want necessarily all of it out there and to be known, because they're not doing it for attention. They're doing it just because they have a platform, they have an opportunity, and they're going to want to try to do something good for some part of the community that maybe either matters to them or that they have seen. Like DeAndre Levy is a really great example. He's obviously now retired. He's not playing anymore, but when he was with the Lions, he got involved with a whole bunch of charities and really became an outspoken player both in the NFL, but he got involved with a lot of the domestic violence prevention stuff. He did T-shirts to try to raise money. He's still involved. Him and his wife are still really involved in the Detroit community, even though he's not playing anymore. So there are a bunch of athletes that do that, both on the Lions and other teams around Detroit, that a lot of times it's not known because they don't want it known.
Did you ever get pushback when you try to cover something like that, if they want to kind of keep it under the radar?
No, because usually it's... I think I have a track record now of me personally. I have a track record of
You've
doing it.
You've been here for a few years,
and also they've seen the stories I've done and the stuff I've written and kind of the way I operate. But also, I think that the majority of them realize that it's good. It's still good. It's better publicity for the organization too, that they're working, or the foundation, or what they're doing. I mean, Calvin Johnson does a whole bunch of stuff. You don't ever really hear about it, but he'll talk about it if you ask him.
Sure.
It's just he's not going to go out of his way to, kind of necessarily beat the drum for it, but
he'll shine a light on the
he has a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
and I mean, he has his own foundation. They mostly do stuff in Atlanta now, but they still do some stuff in Detroit. He runs a free camp for like 2 high schools in Detroit, and that's it. You can only go if you're from those high school. It's really an impressive, it's an application process, because he really cares about the education piece about it as well. So a lot of these guys will do different things, and you just don't necessarily hear about it because they either don't want it publicized, as I've said a couple times now, or
they're busy working on it.
They're busy working on it, or it's just it's not always a story that unfortunately people want to read and are super into, and that's part of it too.
I got to ask about one of the big controversies in the NFL generally, and I know this is a sensitive topic. Can you talk about what's happening with it here in Detroit? And that, of course, is the whole kneeling during the national anthem thing. What does that look like here in Detroit?
So last year, after Donald Trump said what he said, I think it was 8 or 10 players kneeled, and they all locked arms. And Martha Ford, the team owner, was down there, and she locked arms, and Jim Caldwell, all that. The next week, I think it was 2 players knelt, and then after that, no one did. And the Lions had said that they would give money to a significant amount of money to charities that the Lions players had decided on to kind of help further the causes that they cared about. And that was kind of what they did. This year we've asked the same question of, what they're going to do. So far they've linked arms every game. And basically whenever we've asked, they've said that is an in-house thing. When you press it, it's an in-house thing. And that's as far as you're getting. And no one's really saying anything else beyond that.
Do you see a reaction from Lions fans? Because obviously you have a metro city that probably feels one way and a suburban.
I mean, last year you did. There's only, I think at this point now, I mean, I didn't notice anything different than it normally was, the other day or a couple weeks ago during the one preseason game. I think if a player does something, I think there could be a reaction based off of what you saw last year when all of that came to light. But I really don't know the answer to that question. I think it would be something that if something happened, then you would see the reaction. I would hate to try to even predict or what any of that would be. I just know that so far, any time that has been brought up within any Lions player or within the coaching staff that we have asked about it as the media, is generally met with I'm not talking about it, or ask Matt Patricia, or we're keeping it in-house. And then, well, why are you keeping it in-house? That's just our decision. And that's generally been the blanket answer over and over and over again.
Let's return to something else you mentioned, the downtown boxing gym. You've got a piece coming out. We're recording this a couple days before it's released, so it may even be out by the time that this podcast episode's about. Tell us about the downtown boxing gym.
So I found it because I was talking about Tier Whitehead before. I had heard about it here and there, and just kind of talking to people as I talk to people in the locker room, and kind of just reaching out and learning about players and hunting for stories. I had come across this, and I pitched it to my boss in December, and I was like, hey, there's this gym in Detroit that seems to be doing some really cool stuff, like trying to educate kids and keep them off the streets and really try to change their lives. And I was like, I kind of want to go poke around this and see what's up. And they were like, yeah, sure, go for it. Let's see what you got. So I went down there, and it was a really impressive thing. It's a really impressive place that they basically they get kids in, inner city kids in. I think there's 172 students at this point. They've graduated anyone who gets to senior year since the program started in 2007. Anyone who has reached the senior year in their program has graduated from high school. And listen, we all know the situation in Detroit public schools, and they get public school and private school and homeschool. So it's a wide swath of different kids from Detroit. But the Detroit public schools, we know the situation there, and you've seen it. That the teachers are very often overworked. The classrooms are overworked. We've seen schools closing. We know the graduation rates and the dropout rates. They've graduated. I think the number was 276. All 276 kids that have reached the senior year of their program in the past 10 years, or 11 now years, have graduated, and that's
incredible.
Super, it really is. And so what they do is they get them in. They lure them in through boxing, but it's way more than that. Like half of it is a boxing gym, but then behind it, there's classrooms, there's a library. They have tutors that come in from Michigan. I don't know if Michigan State, because that's kind of far, but it's like Michigan, Wayne State, other local universities in the area. They have part-time people that work for them, volunteers, full-time people. They offer a hot meal every day, and what they're able to do, and what the guy who runs it, his name's Coach Collie Sweeney, what he is able to really do and what he's done, he's really able to connect with these kids and give them a positive message and a positive reinforcement, to where I had a lot of kids when I was down there, the few times I was down there, tell me, yeah, I came here to box. I was like, well, you still box? And they're like, no, I don't really box anymore. And they're there more for the education, for the tutoring, because it's helped turn their lives around. They have a fiber optics lab there. They bring in guest speakers. They have career days. And it's something that these kids will leave school, they will get picked up by a van, and I rode in the van one of the days that I was down there. The vans crisscross Detroit. They get picked up in the van, they get taken to the gym, then at 7 o'clock, they get into the vans, different vans, and they get dropped off at home. So it's legitimately door-to-door service, and there's almost no way that they can be on the streets. They have a quote-unquote commitment of you have to be there a certain number of days a week. They're really flexible. They understand, the lives that a lot of these kids leave. Yeah, things come up, sports happen, but they're really focused on individual work too. They have a literacy intervention program that a lot of kids go into, that they need to go into when they're accepted into this program, and it's all done at random. So there is an 850-person child waiting list to get into this program. And they want to serve more. They would love to take all of them, but the way they do it is it's a lot of one-on-one interaction. The two main academic counselors there, Kristen Lux and Mike Mraz, they know every kid. They know everything about every kid. It was amazing. I kind of tailed them for a couple hours one of the days I was there, and it was amazing to watch their interactions with every kid. They knew every kid. They knew what was going on in that child's life. They knew if they had a test, if they had what. It was I sat there and I was kind of amazed watching how they operated all of that. And listen, it's clear the program, I think, is successful based off of the numbers. You know, you look at the numbers and what they've been able to do. And I sat with the literacy intervention for about an hour at one point, and I watched that. And I mean, it genuinely helps kids, and it was a really impressive thing. So I went to my boss. I'm like, listen, there's a story here. Like, this is something that I haven't really seen before, which usually gets me kind of going as far as wanting to write a story positively or negatively. And I was like, I really think this is helping kids in a city that frankly needs it. And he was like, yeah, go do what you need to do. And then we pitched it to the magazine, and they really liked it. And so there's a photo essay and a shorter story in the magazine, and then a much longer story that kind of goes into really what they do and how they do it online.
I'm glad to see
I'm pretty excited about people being able to read it, because I don't know how many people in Detroit know about the gym. They've gotten a lot of accolades recently. Like, Collie was finalist for CNN Heroes last year. Wow. I know the Free Press and Detroit News have written stuff about it before.
The city has highlighted it.
Yeah, they got the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, which is named after the late Buffalo Bills owner, gave them a $500,000 grant. Actually, one of the days I was down there was the day that they got the grant, so they were super excited about it. And that was the largest grant they've gotten, and it's really impressive what they've done. And you know, you go into anything with a healthy dose of skepticism, but it was really interesting to watch it and see, and kind of see something that, you know, you never truly know, but like, it seems really, really legitimate, and really, really like it's helping people and helping these children. And you talk to them, and I remember talking to this one kid, and he had been in and out of the program, and I asked him, like, well, where would you be if you weren't here? And he's like, oh, I'd be in juvie. And I was like, really? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, there's like no question I would be in juvie. And a lot of kids said that. And some of them have used, you know, one of the things that Collie does is he really de-emphasizes the boxing. As he says, boxing is the hook to get them in, but it's the education of why they stay. But the really interesting thing to me is that they have success boxing too. It's not like they just, you know, are not good. Like, their best guy is a guy named Janelson Figueroa Bocachica. I think I got that right.
You got these all off the top of your head. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's a pro fighter now. He's 19 years old. He's 11-0. Listen, in boxing, until you get to like 19-20-0, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because you're fighting a lot of guys who are not the best fighters, you know. But he's won his last 4 fights by knockout. He's one of 2 fighters in the top 200 welterweights that's under 20. So there's the potential that he's pretty good.
Awesome. Well, we'll post a link to that when that comes out.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Great, and I can't wait to read your piece. You obviously thoughtfully reported it and spent a lot of time.
I had, not to go too much into the details, because I'm sure your readers wouldn't care, not at all, but I had 100 pages of notes.
Wow.
And something like 50 or 60,000 words. And that wasn't even all. I eventually stopped transcribing because I knew I knew what I had. But yeah, it was a lot. Like, I remember I sent my boss one of the documents, and he was just like,
oh,
whoa.
Boy.
Like, just like my notes. I was just like, I just want to prove to you, like, yeah.
I will say, as your one-time classmate, I'm glad to see the Syracuse journalism instincts are serving you well all these years later.
I'm trying, you know. But it's the same thing in like the Lions locker room. I just hunt for interesting stories, and I hopefully find them, and you know, more. Sometimes they hit, and sometimes they don't.
Well, Michael Rothstein, Detroit Lions beat writer for ESPN and ESPN.com. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Oh, this was awesome. I had a great time. Please have me back whenever you guys want.
We will.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.